All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is your notes. Again, the slides are going to be posted up on Canvas for the central place theory here. This is one of the more integral parts. If you would have been tested on this stuff, I could have almost guaranteed that a couple questions on your multiple choice or maybe even one of the FRQs might have been on this particular idea of central place theory. But this is one of the more important aspects of the why of the where. Why are things placed where they are in a geographic context? And what services and settlements that exist? Why are they in those particular places, and why are they so far apart? Why do we see big cities in certain places and others? So this is called the central place theory. So you can kind of see that, and we're going to go around here and check out some of the aspects of central place. So first guy that I'm going to talk about is Walter Christaller. He is the individual who comes up with this in his dissertation. He is from Germany, as you can see by the German writing there. Published in 1933, but it was translated to English in 1966. He comes up with this theory based on his observations of the German rural areas, where towns exist and all that. So he looks at all the different things that services and settlements that exist. And again, if you want to look this up, you can. Central places in southern Germany. You can kind of read through this and see what his dissertation states. But essentially what it states is that each individual town, hamlet, city, whatever you might want to call it, or village, it's equally distributed from each other. So each little town that we see has an equal distance between each other until you see new services that exist. The great example that they will use here is called, they like to call it the I-81 corridor. Even though I-81 goes up north here into this section, it does take part when you get to Dauphin County. It does go down into Cumberland and into Franklin counties here. And that's the part we're going to take a look at, this I-81 corridor, specifically Cumberland and Franklin counties. All right. But the one thing that Christaller mentioned is that each town that we see along a particular area, this is the Cumberland Valley, pretty fertile territory here from farmland, and also aspects, lots of industry, manufacturing, distribution centers along this route as well. But you look at each little town that exists. Now, here's little towns that you can see is approximately 11 miles apart from one another. And each of these circles represents the radius as to where people can go within that circle to get the major services that they want to find. So you have Greencastle, Chambersburg, Shippensburg, Newville, Carlisle, Mechanicsburg. And note, when you draw Mechanicsburg's circle, the radius is much closer to Harrisburg. The reason being, Harrisburg and Mechanicsburg being that the river is right there, and that river becomes a halting point of transportation. You cannot just walk across the river, even though the Susquehanna is shallow at some points. If you want to distribute goods and services or go to goods and services, you can't just randomly cross the river. So at that point you needed a ferry. Now the ferries don't exist. They built several bridges that go across Harrisburg, but it makes a lot of sense when these towns are established, why Harrisburg is so much closer to Mechanicsburg than the rest of those towns down this map. All right, so if you go down and take a look at these, you can definitely see where they are. But then if you look at Mechanicsburg, you go a little bit south of Mechanicsburg, you have Dillsburg, which is going to be right around here. It's not on this map, but it's relatively close to that. It's where we see other parts in York County. But a lot of these towns that we see, even after you get in Harrisburg outwards, you might see similar locations and distances between the two. But if you look at these areas, you can see that they are equal distant from each other. All right, and the circle was used to kind of highlight that radius. All right, the one aspect of the central place theory is obviously that there are more small places than big places. All right, the ratio of big places to small places is relatively consistent or constant wherever you go, and the big places are much more farther apart than those small places. So we take a look at cities and other aspects when we look at how they label these things. So what we call a central place is, by definition, a settlement whose livelihood depends on the sale of goods and services to people in the surrounding area, but it is distributed here as the dot in the middle of the circle. That's your central place. Now, this central place could be anything. It could be a city, it could be a village, and it could be other factors as well, but you'll see how they play on top of each other here as this central place kind of develops moving forward. All right. Now, the hamlet sizes. You have hamlet, village, town, city, and metropolis in terms of the 5 key points that people like to view as this. So we go back to this circle again. You can see that this could be a metropolis, let's say Philadelphia, and it expands outward. This could be New York City and expands outward much further. It could be Los Angeles. It could be Houston. It could be Chicago. Though Chicago is limited geographically, obviously, but if you look at from where it's at and how it expands outward, you're going to see equidistant expansion. So like Chicago, the north and the southern parts, like you're looking at this, you're only looking at this section of Chicago here that is used, but it is used equidistant from certain parts of the city. All right. But then you go through each of these sections, and the circle that is called the trade market area, which is where people would normally live to get to that area for that particular good or service. So if you live in this circle, chances are you're probably going to go to that central place to get what you need, no matter what it may be. All right. However, when you start putting these together, the circle as a shape does not really work out as much. There's little gaps, so everyone doesn't fit into it. And if you try to overlap them, then obviously you have multiple people going to different places and have different options. So Cristallo came up with the hexagon as his way to utilize the roundness of a circle plus the straight rigid lines with the hexagon to help really clearly identify where people are going to go based on where they live in those market areas. So we see the difference between the two here, why the hexagon is way more important and why it's utilized more often here. You'll see this hexagon at the beginning of Key Issue 2 in your textbooks on page 434, and why that was utilized and why a hexagon and not a square or a circle are utilized as well. So when you look at this hexagon, ideally the best shape. And you can see how it honeycombs there together. So let's get back to this theory. It presumes that if the if aspect of premises or assumptions that, the if section of this, that there's a featureless plane with no barriers, sort of like what we looked at with our von Thunen model earlier in agriculture. No barriers to movement whatsoever. Rivers, no mountains, nothing that exists that would be a barrier to movement. That all population within that market area outside of the central place is equally distributed, all right? Which means there's similar purchasing power and behavior. That each individual that lives within that particular section is purely motivated to buy and sell things through economic means, meaning they're trying to save money, make money, whatever it may be. And then finally, the last part of it is the integrity of law of supply and demand. The customers are needed for a business to stay open. That is key. That's 100% true when you look at these individuals that take a look at the needs of businesses and all the other stuff. Now, when you pay attention to see how this grid overlaps to one another, you can see that each of the biggest circles, the cities, all right, will be connected. Actually, the cities are here in the middle. Excuse me. The cities are here in the middle. All right. But each city, if you draw a line in a perfect world, which we don't live in, but this is just a theory, is going to be equidistant from each other. So you can see how this relates. So you have the city, town, village, and then the hamlet. And as you go to each level, all right, the nearest place you're going to get is the hamlet. Then you're going to have the village. Then you're going to have the town, and then the city. And then even on a larger scale, you could probably find a metropolis somewhere if they added another grid to this, all right? But within each area of a hamlet, all right, in this center part, the people living in this market area of that particular hamlet, are going to go within this hexagon. If they need more specific goods and services, they're going to go to the next biggest option. If it's not there, next biggest option. And it's wherever they are with this hamlet, they're going to go into this area here, and then they're going to go into this area here when it comes to the areas, and then you look at the towns and everything that exists. This whole hexagon here is a whole huge market area with smaller goods and services inside of it. All right, so you can kind of see how this plays out and how it overlaps and why, there's more specific, intricate parts of a good or a service in a small town. All right, so the other aspects of the outcomes of this is that there will be regular spatial order in the number of central places. All right, which means there'll be fewer large places and many small places. There will be a regular spatial order of the spacing of a central place. All right, which means that this larger space is relatively farther apart and the smaller places are closer together. Look at distance. Look at your cities. Furthest apart of all the options down here. The hamlets right here, closest together amongst all these areas. All right, so kind of see how this plays out here. Now, high order goods and services that, obviously higher order goods are going to be in those cities, all right, that are more valuable and frequently demanded. All right. And because the goods and services are more valuable, people are willing to travel farther to shop for them, which means these are higher order goods and services are available in higher order central places. All right. Low order, and because goods and services are less valuable, people are willing to travel only short distances to shop at these areas. Again, you can go through these in the notes and read through the notes in the section here, but I'll cancel the screen to show you what I mean by those notes. But if you look at central place functions, all right, of like services found in any central place, grocery stores, gas stations, jewelry stores, doctors, dentists, museums, concert halls, auto dealerships, whatever. These are some of the factors that I asked at the beginning of the year. If you drive from like Central Dauphin High School to Central Dauphin Middle School, where Landis Field is like day 1, day 2 of our school year. How many grocery stores would you pass? How many bookstores? How many museums? Churches? Anything else you might find? How many will you find, and why would you find more of one than the other? This is part of Central Place. All right, this is what this is all about. Again, getting back to this graphic, you can see a little bit more detail there. But some questions I want you to think about. Would you travel farther to buy a new car or to get this week's groceries? All right, think about this. To get the week's groceries, and I mean, obviously, this isn't a normal world without coronavirus, but would you travel farther to buy a new car or get this week's groceries? Many people would probably argue to buy a new car. All right. Would you travel farther to see your family physician or a heart specialist? Many people would see a heart specialist. In fact, many people, when they go into, like, for instance, Hershey, where the family physicians are in this area, if they want to go see a really specified specialist, you're going to want to go somewhere that's much closer. Johns Hopkins is probably the next closest thing that we'll see people going to, because it's in a much larger area with much more specialized medical practices. Finally, would you travel farther to go to elementary school or go to high school? And this is the key aspect of looking at schools. Most people would say to go to high school unless you live near, Central Dauphin High School. All right, so depends where you live. You might travel farther to go to high school than you would elementary school because there are more of those elementary schools. All right. Obviously, look at hierarchy of educational services. All right. The city, college, town, and then the village. The town has the high school, the village has the elementary school, and then the hamlet has no schools. They will travel to the villages for their schools. All right. Again, you look at the proximity of what you see. The stock exchange is only one of those. Sports stadiums get a little bit larger. Regional shopping malls, department stores, tax services, grocery. The lower down this list, the more you will see of these services in those particular areas. That's kind of giving you some point of what Chris Stoller saw. You'll see the same stuff over and over again. A great comparison. Why do you see more Weis Markets and Giants than you see Costco's? Why can you pinpoint the location of a Giant or of a Weis Markets or a Carnes than you would when it comes down to your aspects of going to a Costco? Same thing. Costco provides a much more higher order service. Bulk goods that people need. All right. Big trade of the area. The two aspects that people look at: how far consumers are willing to travel and how many customers that a service needs. So when you're advertising, are you going to spend money on advertising like if you're Hershey Park going to California? Probably not, because people have their own amusement parks in California. Most advertisement from Hershey Park goes within a 300-mile radius, because they know if they get those people, they'll be able to get them to come to the park, because 300 miles isn't that far when it comes to a very specialized service like an amusement park. All right. Two aspects here: threshold and range. You can see this on Key Issue 2. You can look up these definitions. Again, you can go through these on your own. But you pay attention to each of these, threshold versus range. With your customers, a store cannot afford to stay in business. So that's why when you see like the Weis Markets just closed right by the Target out near the Costco, people weren't going to that Weis Markets anymore. All right, the Weis Markets had to close down, and people had to choose that live near that area where they want to go then. Do they want to go to other Weis Markets in the area, or do they want to go to that Giant that was just opened up right next to the Mission Barbecue? All right, the range, the maximum distance in which a person will not travel to purchase a good or service. This is where your advertising comes in. All right. Beyond a certain distance, people cannot afford the travel costs. So some people would rather go to Knoebels than go to Hershey Park. I don't blame them. Knoebels is free. So look at the affordability is also aspect as well. All right. So I got all these other things I'll show you here. Go across. I'm kind of cut for time, but you can kind of see where these are. But go through the rest of these notes. If you have any questions, don't be afraid to ask. All right. We got our